You're saying that women aren't intelligent enough to run these top companies?
No, I didn't say that at all.
You're saying intelligent and conscientious by implication are not female traits.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that at all.
If you haven't seen that interview, that is literally the whole thing. Especially since Rebecca is having such a good time, I want to make sure we're all on the same page just to go over. We don't need to explain what fallacies themselves are again, because we went over that already. But another quick video just to, again, get us all on the same page.
Person's character instead of responding to their argument. The point of the matter is it's a deflection. Instead of addressing the argument or the thing they are trying to say, you are instead focusing on this essentially irrelevant information that has nothing to do with the argument itself.
Right now, today, as a candidate, he supports federal taxpayer funding for Planned Parenthood. I disagree with him on that. That's a matter of principle.
You are the single biggest liar. You probably are worse than Jeb Bush. You are the single biggest liar.
Now, as entertaining as that was, we can see how that is not a response to the claim that Ted Cruz made. He just said, "Oh, you're worse than Jeb Bush," and because it was funny, and it sure shit was funny, then people clapped, and that's how the debate works. But when you're in an actual conversation, you don't have this very structured style that the presidential debates do, which is a whole other discussion about whether they should be doing it this way. Remember they were talking about having Joe Rogan be the moderator. That would have been awesome, but that's another story for another day.
Nasty guy. Now I know why he doesn't have one endorsement from any of his colleagues.
John, I
Senator, pick from the buffet there.
He's a nasty guy.
So the next fallacy I want to talk about is the appeal to authority.
Before we go, so Jihad earlier was talking about appeal to authority. So let's see how he has what he goes into. Before we do that, I want to just kind of say, does anybody else really want to see Donald Trump in the debates, but just not win? I would love to see that. I would love to see that. All right, moving on. So this is what we mean by appeal to authority. And again, the fallacy is not necessarily appealing to authority, but appealing to an unjust or an inappropriate authority.
And the basic idea is this: if somebody is making some kind of a claim and you question them about it, ask for some kind of proof or their reasons about why they're making this claim, and they reply with an appeal to authority or say something like, this person who is an expert said so. The key to a true appeal to authority fallacy is the supposed expert has to be less than credible. So an example of this might be if somebody tells you to talk on your cell phone because you might get a brain tumor. And when you ask them how they know that, they might say, well, my brother's a doctor and he said so. And then when you investigate, where'd your brother go to med school? Oh, it turns out he has a degree in philosophy. And although he is technically a doctor, he's not a medical doctor, and therefore he has no credibility on this issue.
So the difference there, of course, is, okay, if you're a doctor, you're a neuroscientist or a neurologist, then okay, maybe that appeal to authority is appropriate. And maybe you'll teach me something new about how cell phones do this, that, and the other. But being a doctor of philosophy does not give you authority on how cell phones affect your brain. So you are, again, going back to Jihad's comment here, that using the word empirically can be or is an appeal to authority. The only problem is when it's an appeal to an unqualified authority.
Next fallacy I want to talk about is the straw figure fallacy. This is also called straw man fallacy, but some people are trying to make it more politically correct and call it straw figure because it can be men or women. So the straw figure fallacy is essentially a pandemic in our world. And it is easier to attack a weakened version of somebody's argument than to attack the real version of that argument. So let's say I'm saying something that's quite nuanced and technical. Somebody could dumb that down into some really dumb statement and then attack that.
Right, so you're saying you've done your research and women are
Type of 1 if you have seen this interview.
unhappy dominating men.
I didn't say they were unhappy dominating.
But you're saying that makes them unhappy, by and large.
I'm saying that. No, I'm not saying that. And I actually haven't said that.
So you don't believe in equal pay?
No, I'm not saying that at all.
You basically saying women need to just accept they're never going to make it on equal terms.
No, I didn't
If I was
say
a
that.
young woman watching that, I would go, you're saying that women aren't intelligent enough to run these top companies?
No, I didn't say that at all.
You're saying intelligent and conscientious by implication are not female traits.
No,
I mean,
I'm not
that's very
saying that.
dangerous territory.
I'm not saying that at all.
Are women less intelligent than men?
No, they're not.
This, if you haven't seen that interview, I think it's Kathy Newman, Jordan Peterson versus Kathy Newman, and that is literally the whole thing. he'll say something about, you know, the difference between men and women, and she'll say, so you're saying, and just straw man everything that he's saying, which is why he's like, no, that's not what I'm saying. And he handled himself like a pro. He was like, no, that's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is this. I'm saying X, Y, Z. So what you're saying is A, B, C. Like, no. I said X, Y, Z. So what you're saying is D, E, F. Like, can we, you know, yeah, that was a good one. That was a good one. So moving on to a false dilemma.
Fallacy. This one boils down an argument into one of two camps, one of two conclusions, and they are usually opposites. The reason why it is a fallacy is because there are often many shades of gray in between. So it would be like me saying you must be a Democrat or Republican. You must be black or white. When in reality, you know, there's many shades in between those two things.
I think I may have missed it if he said this, but this is also referred to as a false dichotomy. Rebecca asks, what is whataboutism a logical fallacy? So I don't believe so. So logical fallacies are usually in the context of formal argumentation. And so we were talking earlier about syllogisms, meaning, you know, if all cats have tails and Bucko is a cat, those are your two premises. The conclusion is that Bucko has a tail because all cats have tails. And so when you're using whataboutisms, it definitely depends because, like, let's say we're talking about, you know, all the racist things Trump has done. And that is a reason or a premise to get to the conclusion Trump is racist, therefore we should support Joe Biden. Then if we say, well, what about Joe Biden's racism? Because the conclusion has to do with that same thing, then that's not it's definitely not a logical fallacy. But it's not let's call it a faux pas of argumentation. That's not really, you know, what we would say. But if we were saying, you know, we've got to pick either Donald Trump or Joe Biden, and Trump is really racist, and someone were to say, well, what about Saddam Hussein? He was racist too. That's a real whataboutism that would be fallacious. And it's like, that has nothing to do with what we're talking about. I think if anything, a whataboutism would best fit under the straw man category, where it's like you're trying to create a different argument that you can argue against instead of the argument that you're being presented. But good question. Good question. So false dilemma or false dichotomy.
What choices are we going to make to reach that goal? Either we ask the wealthiest Americans to pay their fair share in taxes, or we have to ask seniors to pay more for Medicare.
So the reason this is a false dichotomy is because he's setting up that there's only two options when there's more options that exist.
The slippery slope fallacy. This one assumes that a step in a certain direction, a small step, will eventually lead to like a chain reaction of further events into some kind of exaggerated outcome.
So I want to specifically focus on this one because this one's coming up a lot when we talk about, you know, kids and sexuality and LGBTQI, whatever. And, you know, the argument that like drag queen story hour is a slippery slope. Again, just like with the appeal to authority, just because you are saying that a slope exists doesn't make it a fallacy. I'm gonna back it up and listen to the specific words that he uses about how it's not just the fact that you're connecting A to B. It's something a little bit more nuanced.
The slippery slope fallacy. This one assumes that a step in a certain direction, a small step,
will
eventually lead to like a chain reaction of further events into some kind of exaggerated outcome.
So in order for this to be a fallacy, instead of just saying this is, you know, there's a difference between cause and effect and a slippery slope fallacy. So again, we say, if I throw one of these treats, then Morty's going to go, Morty, my dog, is going to go chase it and eat it. That's just cause and effect. That's not a slippery slope. The slippery slope would be if I give him this this treat, then he's never, ever, ever going to stop asking me for treats, and he's going to be barking the whole time, and I'm not going to be able to do my stream, and then my channel is going to die, and then that is a slippery slope. And so when we're thinking about whether the slope is real or not, whether the slope is accurate or not, we're asking what's the starting point? What's the ending point? And are the steps that chain reaction, is that a reasonable thing? So if we say we're exposing children to LGBT stuff when they're young, to say that it is grooming children is a slippery slope, the only way that would be untrue is if we didn't see drastic changes in the ways children behave in the context of LGBTQIA+. But we are already there. We are already there. We already see young boys in strip clubs stripping with drag queens. Family friend, drag your kid to Pride. That is not a slippery slope because we are already there. We've already fallen down the slope. So to say that we fell down a slope is not a fallacy because it happened. So I just want to make sure that that one was clear because that's been coming up way too often. Remember the first video we talked about with Cosmic Skeptic, he was saying how often people misuse the logical fallacies. And that's the biggest one that I've seen lately.
When you're young, your parents might have thrown this one at you quite a bit. It's like, well, don't do that. Otherwise, you're going to end up a drug addict on the street kind of thing. When in reality, one little step in a certain direction doesn't necessarily mean that you will continue down that path.
Okay, Stephen Baldwin, hi. You're against legalizing marijuana. Why?
Obviously, Joy, there's a lot of common sense that needs to be included in this conversation. It's a very simple reality. Marijuana leads to doing worse things. That's just a fact. I don't care what anybody says, what the debate is. When you smoke marijuana at a young age, it'll usually lead to alcohol abuse and harder drugs. So right there, that's one reason why it should not be legalized.
The circular.
So that, sorry, Mom Cam, but that is, a slippery slope fallacy, not just the slippery slope, because of the small, the small step of smoking weed, the exaggerated or the chain reaction and the exaggerated landing point.
Argument fallacy. This one is when somebody's argument starts with what they're trying to prove in the end. Sort of like the Bible is true because it says it's true, or something.
Or a woman is anybody who calls himself a woman. Like, what is a woman? Anybody who calls himself a woman calls himself a what? That's circular logic or a circular argument.
And like, you must obey the law because it is illegal to break the law. Essentially, the start and the end of the argument are the same thing, and it's like this endless circle of reasoning.
Hey, we got Luke Hazley, the smooth cat in the building. Happy Sunday, stopping by to say hello. She says, hello, hello. Glad to have you.
Escape the loop.
So for you, why do you put your faith in believing that one book?
Well, let's just start off with the fact that the Bible is true. All the others are not true. That's the biggest key. God is true, and his word that comes from him is also true. That's kind of an easy way to answer that question. How do we know the
Is it though?
Bible's true? By virtue of it coming from God, who is the truth.
I think it was pretty clear in that example how that's circular logic, that like, oh, this is true because it says it's true. And it's weird. It's weird how when we get to dogmatic thinking, we were going to get here. We go to dogmatic thinking, whether it's religious like we just saw, or it's ideologically dogmatic in a political sense, like listening to Dr. Fauci or CNN in general, then it's true because the people who said it's true. Okay, well, anything else? Or are you just blindly listening to people who tell you stuff? Oh, you are just blindly listening to people who tell you stuff. All right.
So this one is kind of funny.
So we're on the alphabet soup fallacy.
It's when somebody assumes that the more big words, acronyms, abbreviations, or kind of like shop talk they use, the more knowledgeable they must be on the topic. It's sort of like you're not allowed.
You see this in politics all the time. Other places too, but specifically in politics, people will just be, especially with the woke stuff. Like, the systemic injustice that going on and are like just saying buzzwords and repeating rhetoric, but not actually saying anything.
Be really knowledgeable and smart about something unless you use all these big words. So you see this a lot in like academic circles. It kind of irritates me in a way because I'm of the belief that if you really know a topic well, you should be able to explain it to a child. And if you can only explain it to other academics, then really, do you really know your stuff? So.
And this is, again, to take it away from politics and religion, I have a friend who is a doctor of psychology, and I went to school for psychology. So, I have an understanding of psychological stuff. Obviously, I just got my bachelor's. But I was talking to her and just texting back and forth. It seemed like she was speaking as if she was writing a term paper. And it's like, can you just talk to me like a normal person? And the categorization of the technical this, and it's like, just use words that when this happens, the motherfuckers be getting fucked up. Like, okay, you don't have to say it like that, but if you understand complex topics and you can break it down then it means you truly understand it. And you don't need that alphabet soup in order to just talk about it and hope the other person doesn't know what the hell you're saying.
Alphabet soup fallacy is kind of one of my personal pet peeves.
What do you mean by God? Part of the conception of God that underlies the Western ethos.
Oh my God. As much as I love Jordan Peterson, he is terrible at this. He does this all the time.
What do you mean by God? Part of the conception of God that underlies the Western ethos is the notion that whatever God is expressed in the truthful speech that rectifies pathological hierarchies. And that isn't all it does. It also confronts the chaos of being itself and generates habitable order. That's the metaphysical proposition. And that's best conceptualized as at least one element of God. And so I would
Oh, he's not done. Okay, my apologies.
think about it as a transcendent reality that's only observable across the longest of time frames, the longest of iterated time frames, to your point.
Does anybody know what the hell he just said? And notice how we started off talking in a religious context about how religious people are doing this, that, and the other wrong. Then we were talking about in a more political context, and we we're saying these people on the left are doing this wrong. Now we've got somebody who is on the right, but also in the religious realm. Yet it's the religion that's causing the fallacies to present themselves. Dr. Peterson is way smarter than I could ever hope to be. But that shit made no sense. I would play it again. Let's play, why not? The question was, what do you mean by God? And let's slow this down, in Jordan Peterson. So regular speed.
Personal pet peeves.
What do you mean by God? Part of the conception of God that underlies the Western ethos.
Okay, so part of the conception of God that underlies the Western ethos. So we're not talking about Eastern. We're talking about a Judeo-Christian. The concept that underlies God in Western ethos
Is the notion that whatever God is expressed in the truthful speech that rectifies pathological hierarchies.
So the truthful speech that rectifies pathological hierarchies. So what I believe that means is that there's a divine order, and God is that which is manifested when we speak in ways that... So sorry to interrupt your podcast experience. I just want to remind you, if you're enjoying what you're watching, please hit the like button and subscribe for more content. And if you really love it, there's some support links in the description. I would love if you could help out the channel. And back to the show. Get us back on God's track, so to speak.
That isn't all it does. It also
that's not all it does.
Confronts the chaos of being itself and generates habitable order.
So allows us to come to deal with the chaos of being human.
That's the metaphysical proposition, and that's best conceptualized as at least one element of God. And so I would think about it as a transcendent reality that's only observable across the longest of time frames, the longest of iterated time frames.
So eternity.
To your point.
So basically all he's saying is that the idea of God is speech that leads us back to God's word or God's word. That's all he meant. But it took us 2 viewings to actually parse through and see what he meant. When he's at a live thing with other people who are intellectuals and we'll be talking, and you could tell that Sam Harrison and Weinstein there, the other guys on the stage, were just like, come on, bro. What the fuck are you talking about? Moving on to the bandwagon fallacy.
The bandwagon. So if you've ever had a parent ask you if you would jump off a bridge if your friends were all doing it, you basically had a parent that was trying to protect you from this fallacy. So the bandwagon says just because a large group of people doing something or saying something, it doesn't make it true. So another word for this might be social proof. The more people that believe something, for example, the more credible it appears. If one person believes in some crazy religious idea, it doesn't look very credible. But if 10,000 people all believe in it, all of a sudden people are like, maybe there's something to that. The red herring.
And that's, again, the bandwagon is something we use a lot of times in sports. But think of it in the same context. Like you're just on this because everybody else is on this. And the red herring. Not to be confused with the red wedding.
is when you divert away from the actual issue and use information that sort of looks to be relevant, but in the end, it's not really relevant. It's sort of like word salad. And you see politicians especially doing this a lot. They could be asked a direct question in a debate, and yet they find ways to kind of talk around the issue, maybe bring up other things, but never really address the actual point.
So this is, I believe, because you don't really hear this one being talked about. You don't really hear, oh, that's a red herring in the midst of debate. So I think this is kind of similar to the just the word salad one that we had with Jordan Peterson on stage.
That is a red herring.
What percentage of the government's debt is now owned by the Bank of Canada? What percentage?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as the member opposite knows, our government is operating very much within the fiscal...
The question is, what percentage of our debt is owed to the Bank of Canada?
The Honourable Minister.
As I said, Mr. Speaker, Canada has the fiscal firepower to...
So the question, I don't know, it doesn't matter what they're actually talking about. The guy asked for a percentage, which is a number. And that's not what she's getting.
Do what it needs to do. We have the lowest debt to GDP ratio.
How much has the bank printed this year to fund borrowing to the government?
Again, that's just a clear dollar amount. That is the question. That is the answer to that question.
The Honourable Minister.
As I said, Mr. Speaker, I really want to make clear tonight that an independent Bank of Canada is key to...
Question. How much has the government of Canada borrowed from the Bank of Canada this year?
Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it represents a profound misunderstanding of how the Canadian economy or...
Personal...
That's... And I mean, you see that everywhere. You see that everywhere in politics. You see that, and definitely in, on the big stage, the presidential debates. Nobody's given a clear answer except for everybody was going to get free healthcare. Raise your hand, and everybody raised it. Oh, then you're getting a clear answer. Moving on to the one of my favorite logical fallacies of all is the personal incredulity. All that means is people claiming, well, I don't know that, so it must not be true. Your ignorance does not supersede fact.
Incredulity. This fallacy says that because something is hard to understand or it's complicated, that it's probably not true. I often see this presented in debates about evolution.
Yep.
So you have somebody that believes in evolution and maybe somebody that doesn't.
This is, and shout out to my dad, I love him, supported the channel to no end, but this is where he loses me, and he is, just like, I think it was Lopaka who was asking about why monkeys still exist. And the idea that's an argument from personal incredulity. The reason that you're asking why monkeys still exist is because you don't understand how evolution by natural selection works. Or if you're saying, it couldn't be evolution. Look at the human eye. It's so look at a flower. A beehive is a perfect honeycomb. Just because you think that it's too complex for it to be explained doesn't mean you're right.
And the person that doesn't believe in evolution will often use this fallacy to kind of say, well, evolution's probably not true because that just makes no sense. It's too complicated, right? But that person has never really taken the time to study the science, and a lot of these things, for example, might have really complicated science. So,
and the frustrating thing is that a lot of times they'll say, I have studied evolution. You cannot study the theory of evolution by natural selection and not understand why the question, why are there still monkeys, is a nonsensical question. So if that's a question that you don't know the answer to, then you need to continue doing research before you go to somebody else and act like you have a good argument. And the number of times I hear it, it's astonishing. Everyday people, you hear it all the time. Personal incredulity.
It's almost like in order to truly understand it, you'd have to do a degree in biology or even further, chemistry, biochemistry, and truly dive into these topics before you could even say whether something was valid. But these people choose to do no research and instead, wow, that just sounds so unlikely and complicated. I'm going to choose not to believe that, and that is false.
This is the other side of the appeal to authority. Nobody can know anything for certain. So when we talk about knowing things in just common language, when you say, I know that my favorite color is blue. Are you positively sure that you weren't given a drug that makes you think that your favorite color is blue? It's very unlikely, but can you prove? So the level of certainty should never be the goal. It should be a level of confidence. And that sometimes requires us to go to other people who know more than us. Not because they're necessarily smarter, but simply because they've done the work. So let's see the example of personal incredulity from good old Bill O'Reilly.
Not a scam, in my opinion. All right. Tide goes in, tide goes out. Never a miscommunication. You can't explain that. You can explain why the tide goes in.
So this is David Stillman. He used to be the president of the American Atheists organization. He got in some Me Too shit and wasn't there.
I'll tell you why it's not a scam, in my opinion. All right. Tide goes in, tide goes out. Never a miscommunication. You can't explain that. You can explain why the tide goes in.
Tide goes in, tide goes
out. See, the
out.
water, the tide comes in and it goes out, Mr. Silverman.
Maybe
it always
it's
comes
Thor
in
on top of
then
Mount
goes
Olympus
out.
who's making the tides go in and out.
The false cause.
So the reason that was a silly thing is that we do know how the tides work, and it has to do with gravity and the moon and this and that. And maybe I personally don't have the exact formula memorized, but as far as relevant to a conversation like this is settled science. Now remember, I just talked about that how we can never get to complete 100% certainty, but the chances of us discovering something where the tides are not tied to the moons and the moon cycle and gravity is next to impossible, because there's so much evidence that has been recreated. The studies have been recreated, all of this kind of stuff. That's how we know, like with gravity, that I cannot be perfectly certain that when I drop this, it's going to fall. But I would bet all the money that I will ever make in my life that when I let go of this, it's going to fall. Wow! If I didn't understand gravity, I might not be so willing to say, yeah, just take all my money if it doesn't fall. But I understand how it works. So if you didn't understand how gravity works, you're like, okay, so if this thing does this thing, then you get all the money. But if it doesn't, then we take all your money and you have no idea what's going to happen. Well, that's a very different thing, because we've been testing gravity for centuries.
Fallacy.
So false cause fallacy.
This is one of my favorite fallacies, and you see it a lot in sort of health circles or alternative medicine circles. It basically says that if B occurred after A, that A caused B. So an example of this might be...
So something you may have heard often is correlation does not equal causation. And this is exactly that's the sentiment that follows this fallacy, was that you saw something happen and then you saw something else happen afterwards. And so you're attributing causation there, when there could be an outside factor that caused both, or they could just be completely unrelated. Let's see what example he gives.
I started to feel a little bit sick. I had a cold, so I quickly went and drank 8 glasses of water, every morning until the cold went away. And then you assume that drinking 8 glasses of water every single morning gets rid of your cold. Obviously, there's lots of extreme examples of this. People make all kinds of claims all the time. They might eat something or take something, and then something happens. And it's sort of this evidence that doesn't really prove something is true. Other things, like examples of prayer working, often have this. Well, I prayed that my cold would go away, and my cold went away, therefore prayer works.
Which was my youngest daughter's diagnosed with cystic fibrosis. And so she was struggling a lot with a lot of...
What do we got in the back here? We have some kind of essential oils. What else do we see here? I'm sure this is some type of tea.
And different issues that were just making me just feel overwhelmed. And I was introduced to an essential oil called Breathe, and I started using it one day, putting it on her chest. A few months later, it dawned on me that she was better.
This is precisely what I mean. How did I know that she was, an essential oils person? How did I know that? Because I've seen this a million times. I've seen it a million times. And everybody who subscribes to, whatever it is, any homeopathic thing, any, burning sage, whatever it is, these people always have the same logic, and it just stops. It's just, well, this happened and then that happened, so there you go. It's like, okay, well, did you do any other type of tests, or you're just kind of doing whatever, which you're free to do. I mean, if it makes you happy, do whatever you want, but don't get on me when I'm like, oh, essential oils are bullshit.
Hasty generalization. So this one is the basis of a lot of prejudice, things like racism. And it basically says, if you look at the actions of an individual or a small group, you can then assign that to the larger group. So an example of this might be, let's say your friend had a golden retriever and that golden retriever was aggressive. If you use the hasty generalization fallacy, you would say all golden retrievers must be aggressive, which obviously is not true because golden retrievers are nice. So the last one I'm going to talk about is the fallacy fallacy. And I thought it was appropriate because it basically says, just because somebody used a logical fallacy in their argument does not necessarily mean that their argument is false. So let's say somebody used the false cause fallacy and said, I drank some orange juice and then my cold went away. You can't necessarily say that it's not true because it's still possible that the orange juice got rid of the cold, but you can't definitively say it. So you can't say it's false, but you also can't say it's true. Anyway, guys, thanks for watching. Hope you got something out of it. If you like this video, hit the thumbs up button.
So, you know, again, this is a little bit more in-depth than the first video we watched, but I didn't want to bore you with all of that stuff, you know, before, you know, we got into the good stuff. So again, those are the most, and there's more fallacies than that, but you're not going to see them very often. And if you do, a lot of times they can be like, you know, when Rebecca asked about the whataboutism, that could be technically in this category, technically in that category, and straw man fits the most, and people are most familiar with that. So that's how you use that. So again, now I want to go back into some real world shit, and I want you guys to see if you can point out fallacies.